It's 1949 in the city of Houston, Texas, and a murder has sent the city into a frenzy. Nightclub owner Vincent Valloni is driving his Cadillac down Chocolate Bayou Road when another car pushes him onto the shoulder and 2 blasts of buckshot ring out. When the smoke clears, Valloni's head is gone from his shoulders and the other car has disappeared. He's the latest man to be assassinated on the orders of the mob in Texas. The Mafia in those days was a secret society only rumored to exist, sparking wild gossip of a murder cult in the city. Arrested soon after on suspicion of orchestrating the murder with 2 henchmen is the softly spoken Peter Michael Duca. The Mafia? What is it? I'm just an ordinary businessman, he exclaims. But Texas did have a mafia in its midst, and this is their story. The Mafia in Texas was headquartered in Dallas, where Sicilian immigrant Carl Piranio formed a crime family in the 1920s alongside his brother Joseph, who served as underboss. It was later described as small but well-organized. Any Italian criminal activity in Dallas required their approval. The family's main interests were bootlegging, narcotics, and gambling, while they also maintained control of a faction in the Houston-Galveston area. Both brothers, and later boss Joseph Civello, were described at one time or another by FBI reports as the head of the Mafia in Texas, not simply Dallas. The rackets in Texas, and indeed Dallas itself, were always dominated by non-Italian criminals. The crime family was largely content to make what it could without attempting to seize control. It never had the numbers or power to make it a realistic prospect to begin with. Carlo died in 1930, before law enforcement became aware of his position in the underworld, although he had been arrested in 1919 for handling bonds stolen from a bank, and would have been involved in at least 2 murders. A later informant noted how a man close to his family was killed by the Mafia in Dallas in 1921, but the motive and identity of the victim remain unknown. Clearer from later information is the circumstances of the murder of Joe DiCarlo in 1928, carried out by future boss Joseph Civello. DiCarlo, a bootlegger, held out on Mafia tribute and was subsequently shotgunned at a drugstore. Civello claimed the shooting an accident and was later acquitted, though law enforcement and underworld sources were not convinced. Following his death from natural causes, Carlo's brother Joseph succeeded him. He presided over a Texas Mafia summit in 1937 at a farm just outside Houston, attended most notably by Sicilian mafioso Nick Gentile, Gambino member Alfonso Attardi, and Vincent Valloni, a powerful suspected mafioso from Houston. What was discussed at the meeting is unknown, but probably related to narcotics. Members of the crime family were involved in drugs as early as 1926, and in 1937, 2 large smuggling rings tied to members of his Mafia family were uncovered, though he himself was never indicted. The first was a heroin smuggling route based in Dallas, likely run from a Lindsley drugstore at the corner of Harwood and Hickory Streets. It involved 4 members from the crime family, along with associates and also members of the Jewish Ginsburg gang. Despite soldier Franchiani's assertions that he was only sourcing heroin for a dope-addicted racehorse, all received prison sentences ranging from 18 months to over 50 years. In the previous year and a half alone, the ring had netted $700,000, worth over $15.5 million today, and law enforcement described it as the largest drug smuggling operation in the country. Bribes to corrupt government narcotics agents had delayed prosecution for several years, claimed the judge while he remarked of the defendants, "They are dealing wholly for profit in human misery." The second involved Nick Gentile and members from Houston, Galveston, in a drug trafficking ring extending to New Orleans and New York that had imported and sold around $5 million worth of opium. Sam Maceo and at least 5 other suspected members from this faction were arrested and charged with involvement in drug trafficking on an international scale, but the most important members were acquitted despite the fact the Houston organization was said to handle as much as 400 pounds of heroin every week. In the meantime, another mafia hit had taken place in Dallas itself. Around 1932, made man Lawrence Gennaro was assassinated in a car bombing, ordered by boss Joe Piranio, motive unknown. In all likelihood, it was related to a conflict over bootlegging. The Gennaros were especially active in this racket, alongside Raymond, their suspected mafioso brother-in-law, said to control bootlegging and illegal liquor distribution in Dallas during the 1920s. The crime family seemed to have been relatively uninvolved in gambling during these early decades, at least in Dallas. Civello later confided to another suspected member that gambling and prostitution in Dallas remained completely dominated by non-Italians throughout the 1940s, despite his own attempts to change that the decade beforehand. Prior to his imprisonment, he had been running a large operation at St. George Hotel on Main Street, taken over from gangster Warren Diamond after his suicide in 1932. It boasted the only wire service into Dallas, crap games, and police protection. When Civello was arrested in the Narcotics case of '37, he was initially told he would only serve a year and a day if he entered a plea of guilty, but instead ended up with a 15-year sentence. It was close associate Al Marshall's belief that Civello's lawyer and the judge in the case were both in league with racketeer Benny Binion to remove Civello from the scene, with Civello himself later stating he was put away to help someone else. Binion soon after took over gambling operations at the hotel, and going forward to 1944, both he and Civello's former lawyer were still anxious to have parole denied for fear of losing control. Marshall, however, managed to secure his early release through a well-paced $7,500 bribe to a friend on the U.S. parole board. The Mafia faction in Galveston was far more active in gambling during this period, led by Sam Maceo of Galveston and his brother Rose. Sam, in an FBI report, was labeled a very important member of the Mafia in Texas. Originally working as a barber, during Prohibition, he and his brother became the leaders of a group of liquor and narcotics smugglers. Once Prohibition ended, they muscled in on gambling rackets, becoming both wealthy and influential in local politics. Legitimately, Sam owned bars, nightclubs, and 2 hotels. Illegitimately, by 1950, the brothers controlled virtually all gambling rackets in the city and tolerated no opposition. When their brother-in-law was robbed in 1933, the suspected thief turned up soon after on the pavement after being shot twice. Despite his last words incriminating Rose, the mobster was never convicted. But the lax oversight of the Free State of Galveston by law enforcement eventually came to an end during the next decade due to state pressure, and the Mafia's presence subsequently declined, aided by the deaths of both Maceo brothers in 1951 and 1954. A congressional committee report posthumously labeled Sam as the former underboss of the Mafia in Texas, but this identification is not corroborated anywhere else. Almost all members of the Houston-Galveston faction were only suspected inductees of LCN, their membership and position never being truly confirmed. Though Rose Maceo's presence at a Dallas Mafia meeting in 1953 is another indication they were members. In nearby Houston, Don Vincenzo Vallone reigned supreme. Like the Maceos, he was heavily involved in gambling and not afraid to use violence. After a patron got unruly at his 21 club on the block between Milam and Travis Streets in 1939, he beat him, drew his pistol, and shouted, "Get back and let me kill the son of a bitch," before unloading 2 shots. Although initially convicted for the killing and sentenced to life imprisonment, he was later paroled. He was also suspected alongside the Macios in the 1937 narcotics ring, while his farm had been used for the Texas Mafia meeting of that year, which he attended with his two sons. Although related in some degree to the Piranio brothers, this did not save him when he got in the way of the boss's interests. It was a struggle over gambling in the Houston region that culminated with his drive-by murder in 1949, coordinated by senior Dallas Mafia soldier Peter Michael Duca. Despite his soft-spoken nature, remarked on by reporters, Duca was a man with a long history of mob activity. From 1910, he was an active bootlegger and narcotics trafficker in New Orleans before moving to Pennsylvania in 1928, where he was involved in the murder of two union organizers. Fleeing first to Honolulu, he was caught 4 years later and received a life sentence. Paroled in 1945, he moved to Dallas, becoming a close associate of Joseph Civello. His heart attack while awaiting trial soon after essentially ended the affair. Both of his alleged henchmen were never convicted, and a small homegrown mafia presence continued in Houston up until the late 60s, though its heyday was now over. Dallas during the 1940s was itself a violent city, with 2 to 3 gang murders a month. Suspected soldier Charles Saturnino, described by police as an aspiring executioner for the Mafia, had his house bombed with dynamite early one morning in 1951. A few hours later, he burst into a tavern, shooting dead one man suspected of the bombing and the owner who simply got in his way. Running on foot to a waiting getaway car, he fired wildly at multiple civilians before fleeing the scene. Saturnino said the trouble between him and one of the murdered men was over a woman, specifically his ex-wife, who was also the ex-wife of the victim. Another police line of thought had the murder related to a falling out among safecrackers. Under 2 gambling indictments at the time, Charles nevertheless got away with the murders, seemingly because no witnesses could or would identify him. The city had plenty of other organized crime groups, and the Mafia were not strong enough to control any racket, Italians also being viewed as outsiders by local authorities. Civello noted how even the Chicago outfit had tried and failed to move in on Dallas in this period. In 1951, a carload of members had met Sheriff Bill Decker at a roadblock a mile north of the county line, where he warned, "Turn around and go back. If you cross that line a mile away, you'll go to jail. As long as I'm alive, you won't move in here." The only Italian group operating there remained the Piranio family, though they retained national connections, most notably with the Genovese crime family of New York, but also with the Mafia families of Los Angeles, Kansas City, and New Orleans. Dallas's contact with the National Commission was originally Albert Anastasia of the Gambino crime family, but after his murder, Genovese soldier Michael Clemente became their contact. We know the LA family also relayed commission orders to them on at least one occasion. Civello was to be a close associate of Genovese members, the Pellegrinos, and indeed the relationship between both crime families was so close the FBI mistakenly labeled Dallas a branch of the Genoveses as late as 1967. This evidence goes against the commonly held assumption that Dallas was a branch of New Orleans. No evidence indicates Joseph Civello represented the boss of New Orleans, Carlos Marcello, at the Appalachian Mafia Summit. Law enforcement believe Marcello sent his own henchman, Paul Scarcelli, instead. Even a Sicilian Mafia informant specifically identified Dallas as an independent organization in his testimony. And though Carlos was very close to Civello and supplied Houston with an out-of-state gambling wire, it cannot be argued the family was a faction of his organization until much later. Joseph Piranio committed suicide in 1956 after a brief illness, and Joe Civello, out of prison since 1944, was bumped up from his position as underboss to lead what was left of the crime family. Born at the Poplar Grove Plantation in Louisiana in 1904, he was resident in Dallas since 1924 and had proved himself to the Mafia there by his murder of Joe DiCarlo some 4 years later. His first major crisis as boss would come just 1 year into his reign with the Appalachian Summit, after its aftermath that exposed the existence of the Mafia throughout the United States. At the meet, other mob bosses questioned the position of Dallas in relation to organized crime, specifically in its suitability as a staging post for drug smuggling routes to the east. Although Civello later told an informant, he replied, "The climate was in no way suitable for such an enterprise. Evidence indicates he was back in the drug game before, and indeed for some time after Appalachian." Police intelligence believed he had a hand in a long-running Italian narcotics ring, smuggling drugs from Mexico through El Paso, Texas. Civello, working through an associate, would be contacted at Civello's drive-in at the intersection of West Davis and Fort Worth Avenue after successful runs. As the heat increased in 1959 from the fallout of Appalachian, information on the smuggling ring dried up, and it likely ceased operations. Although the police never proved the existence of this drug smuggling network, we've already seen that Civello was heavily involved in drugs earlier in his career, and other circumstantial evidence indicates involvement in drug traffic from the South. As pointed out by Thomas Hunt in an Informer magazine, he made 2 trips in the span of 6 months, admittedly all the way back in the 1930s to Guatemala and Honduras. It's to be doubted they were for recreation. Meanwhile, a Sicilian Mafia informant who had been active in drug trafficking in South America knew of the existence of the Dallas organization, something most members in New York wouldn't even know about, while police suspected Civello's food import business could be a front for drug importation. What might be inferred from the above is that Civello was possibly already connected with the drug trade in South and Central America, so it's not hard to believe that the police intelligence here has some basis in fact. Other information from informants also hinted at further narcotics involvement since Civello's release from prison. His future underboss Joe Ianni, alongside 2 other suspected members, were at the Lincoln Hotel in Indianapolis in 1946 for a narcotics meet with James Weinberg, leader of the multi-state Weinberg Gang and an associate of the Chicago outfit. In 1952, Toro Marino of the Genovese crime family was reportedly in Dallas selling $75,000 worth of narcotics to Civello, and 3 years later, FBI agents observed him at Idlewild Airport in New York City again meeting Marino alongside other mobsters to discuss another large deal being arranged by Rocco Pellegrino. Rocco and his sons were all made men with the Genovese and known international drug traffickers. An FBI report from 1958 describing Rocco as the Dean of Narcotics in the underworld. In 1958, Rocco's son Peter was arrested alongside 4 suspected members of the Dallas organization for operating a bookmaking facility following a 3-year investigation, Peter seemingly visiting the city every football season to take advantage of the action. By the time they were caught, the bookie center, as law enforcement described it, in 1958 alone had made just over $18,000, worth around $200,000 today. Yet despite the sums involved, an informant told police the gambling gig was only a sideline compared to narcotics and that the clampdown had caused them to simply move the bookies rather than close it down. The Pellegrinos would continue gambling activities in Dallas until 1960, when after briefly buying a new home in the city and setting up a bakery for money laundering, Peter moved back to New York. It's important to stress that gambling was the only area where law enforcement found hard evidence on the Dallas mob after the 1930s. The crime family's involvement in the drug trade after convictions from that decade remained conjecture, because for all their intelligence about narcotics since then, the police never prosecuted anyone. Yet Appalachian had caused Joe Civello to dramatically curtail his activities, possibly explaining this. In 1957, the then Dallas chief of police felt Civello would gladly get back into the narcotics game if given the opportunity, while the Dallas County Sheriff agreed, but believed Civello to be too scared due to increased law enforcement pressure. After initially being convicted for conspiracy by a New York court in relation to Appalachian, informants noted Civello was keeping a very low profile while limiting his criminal contacts. Joe Ianni seems to have been largely in charge at this time. Informant advised in November 1958, all activity in Dallas among Italian hoodlums centers around Joe Ianni at the present time. Indeed, he may have carried out the final Dallas mob murder. In 1963, Ianni called to his brother-in-law, John Carselli's liquor store on East Grand to remove all firearms from the premises for John's safety, he having apparently expressed a desire to take his own life. The next day, Carselli was found dead at his home on Ivy Drive in Mesquite, Dallas, with Joe Ianni the witness to the cause of death. This was despite the reservations of local police, who noted John had been shot first in the chest before a final bullet was shot up through his mouth. John seemingly owed a considerable sum of money to Ianni at the time, and had been under pressure from him to pay back his debts. John's wife initially discovered the body and rang Civello first rather than the police. The FBI had doubts, as seen from their reports, recording that Carselli died under mysterious circumstances, and allegedly from his own hand. A local informant, however, had no doubt the official story was the truth, and talk surrounding his demise remains pure speculation. In regards to Civello, a government report of 1962 stated, "There is no evidence of illegal activity by Joseph Francis Civello." This same report concluded that Texas is not a place where the Mafia has the kind of control it has elsewhere. Civello's activities are very limited, and his associates tend to operate individually. Civello is said to be in a standby position due to the fact that the organization is not able to operate as such in Dallas because of the local law enforcement. Galveston and Houston had already seen their Mafia activity drastically decline, and to a lesser extent the same thing was now happening in Dallas, in large part due to Appalachian, but also other factors. The Mafia had been at its strongest there during Prohibition. Mafia networks remained limited in the southwestern United States due to low Italian populations, and the very success of the early crime family saw many of its older, more experienced members go completely legitimate. Joseph Piranio, for example, had, long before his death, become wealthy in construction. In 1931, he built a store at the southwest corner of Greenville Avenue and Goodwin Street that still stands today. Civello's brother-in-law, the former bootlegger Ross Musso, had largely retired from LCN activities by the 1960s, making money legitimately from grocery stores, restaurants, and real estate. He instead, by this period, served in a supervisory role. Likewise, another suspected early bootlegger for the mob in Dallas was described as quite wealthy in 1968 due to his legitimate business interests. Yet, there was still a younger cohort of members and associates actively engaged in crime. Sometime in the 1960s, Civello is on record as having requested permission from up east to make new members, but it was turned down due to the risk of FBI infiltration. Interestingly, Civello said in his request there should be more members in Dallas than Houston, implying that even at this late stage, Houston had a larger number of mob soldiers. Nevertheless, by 1967, one of the 4 people Civello was proposing had been officially identified as a made man by the FBI, so it's possible all 4 were inducted sometime after the report. With the fallout from Appalachian now waning, Joe Civello seems to have become more involved in mob affairs once more. So let's take a look at the rackets that Texas Mafia members, both individually and collectively, were involved in throughout the final years of his reign. The oldest of Mafia rackets, bootlegging, was one that lasted longer than most for the crime family in Dallas, thanks to the presence of dry Oklahoma just to the north. Two suspected mafiosi, Joseph Coletta and John Carcelli, were notably involved in supplying large amounts of whiskey to Texas bootleggers for transport to Oklahoma, possibly as late as 1963. Another member was a noted fence and forger, while Johnny Ross Patrono exercised some control over Dallas nightclubs, allegedly had to be approached by anyone wanting to license or run one. He was also engaged in check and insurance fraud. But as an informant in 1959 explained to the FBI, the only place the Italian group in Dallas exerts any power at all is in gambling. The family's out-of-state wire was supplied by New Orleans, and they eventually set up a large, well-organized bookmaking ring that extended throughout the state of Texas and beyond, headed by suspected soldier Philip Bosco, aka Mr. Pump. It began when Civello decided to finance Bosco's bookmaking operations in an effort to enlarge them and to show the people up east that a group in Dallas could operate profitably and therefore with a need for more members. He requested Bosco slowly but surely get rid of all non-Italians from the bookmaking operation. And Bosco told an associate, "If we're smart, we'll do what he tells us and make a lot of money." Backed by Civello and Ianni by 1965, the mob's organization headed by Bosco practically controlled all football betting in Dallas and was described by police as the largest and most lucrative bookmaking operation in Dallas and had become known as the Union. In '66, Bosco, following Civello's previous instructions, began removing the last major non-Italian from the enterprise. Going back to 1962, we have some idea how the ring operated. A Greek associate who worked legitimately as a liquor salesman would use his cover to make rounds, first delivering the odds and point spread. He would return later to pick up bets at a number of business fronts, all of which were operated by suspected or known LCN members. Soldier Johnny Ross Patrono would then collect all proceeds from the Greek, presumably delivering them to Ianni and Civello. This was the core crime family group, but Bosco's operations extended much further. A 1969 FBI investigation identified 23 separate but connected gambling operations in Texas, whereby the higher-up bookmakers would feed their gambling line down to the lower-level bookies. The source of the line could not be identified, but Bosco, who apparently received his from New Orleans, and his associate Russell Douglas Matthews, who received it both from Bosco and Las Vegas, are named the top Texas bookmakers based on extensiveness and volume of their operations and widespread contacts. Russell's network extended all the way to Oklahoma City. This may be the operation Bosco was arrested for, worth $500,000 a year, recalled by former Dallas Police Captain W.P. Ganaway. Other smaller-scale gambling establishments were also run by members, and it's clear that illegal gambling was the Dallas crime family's only racket in its later years. To run such an enterprise requires contacts, and associates form an important part of any mafia family. The first man to look at in this regard is close associate Charles J. Sansone, a former detective in the Dallas Police Department and an alleged cousin of Joseph Civello. A detective since the early 40s, he was arrested in 1953 as part of an internal investigation into a police jewelry theft ring, but was acquitted, leading to applause from his fellow officers in the courtroom. His co-defendant and the alleged ringleader of the group was represented by none other than Carl Piranio's son, who was at one time Assistant District Attorney for Dallas County. Dallas Police Chief Carl Hansen was of the opinion that the theft ring would go to Joe Ianni's restaurant to divide up the loot, a place described as a known hangout for thugs and thieves. Despite his continued role on the force, Sansone's relation with Civello put him under suspicion, and at some point he was moved to the auto theft squad so that he could not access Civello's police file. He eventually resigned in 1966, rather than face a civil service hearing and possible termination following his arrest alongside Philip Bosco for gambling. Sansone was an especially close associate of the Dallas mob. He played poker with members every Sunday, worked in his off hours at a liquor store owned by suspected soldier Joseph Coletta, immediately went to work in Ianni's restaurant following his resignation, and was heard telling the Campisi brothers in 1960, "You have been feeding me for 15 years," which could refer to bribes just as easily as food. It's clear he also introduced other detectives to Dallas mob members. At least 2 more, also from the auto theft squad, were spotted meeting Bosco at various times, but if it was simply to make a bet or something more, we do not know. Yet another detective in the mid-1960s was known to pass information to the Campisi brothers on raids planned by the Special Services Bureau. One associate who claimed to help them reach into higher levels of government was Al Marshall, real name Aaron Moshik. An attorney by trade, he traveled around the country with no fixed abode and professed a political background in Washington. Having gained Civello's early release in 1944 through facilitating bribery to the Attorney General, he also managed to secure Franchiani a presidential pardon that halted deportation efforts against him, and further claimed he secured one for Civello's narcotics charge from President Truman. Keep in mind, all these claims come directly from Moshik himself, and though FBI records seem to back up the Ianni pardon to some degree, Moshik had a long criminal record as a master forger and con man. At 21, he had already made $1 million through forged checks. In 1930, he led a plot to extort Illinois Congressman Oscar DePriest with a threatening letter that read, "In exchange for your life, we demand from you $10,000 if you notify any agency, police, Department of Justice, or the Secret Service. It will only react as a steam shovel for your grave." By 1933, he was serving time in a Texas prison and attempting to organize a nationwide fraud network that could secure him enough money to contest his sentence. Out by 38, he changed his name in Fort Worth, Texas, and fell in with Civello around 1944. Their long relationship eventually led to a 1967 plot to buy the Riviera Casino in Las Vegas by securing a Teamsters loan from the mob boss of Kansas, Nick Civello. And according to the former supervisor of the Kansas FBI, William Owsley, he reportedly won Civello's cooperation to win a $15 million loan from the fund. Moshik and Joe Ianni flew to Kansas City to meet him that August, but the deal fell through, possibly due to fears of an informant being involved in the scheme, which were in fact well-founded. While most members owned businesses of their own, several associates still helped in infiltrating legitimate enterprises. Harry David Kahn was a former stockbroker from Wisconsin and a known con man arrested on a charge of confidence game and grand larceny in 1940 Chicago in relation to the bankruptcy of several businesses there. After moving to Texas, he became an oil broker and opened up investment opportunities for Dallas and the Genovese crime family members so that by 1956 he was making $29,000 a year with interests in Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Colorado, and Nebraska. The opportunities went both ways. Kahn was arrested in 1958 alongside Ianni and others for operating gambling establishments. Dead for several years by 1967, others took his place as real estate investment overtook that in oil, including John Dragna, a director at Merchant State Bank, who helped members receive loans despite having no savings, and tipped off Civello and others to FBI probing of their accounts in 1965. When Joseph Civello passed away in 1970, the Dallas crime family was officially labeled inactive by law enforcement. But what happened to the remaining members after his death? Civello passed away from natural causes in 1970, having been boss for 14 years. The position he occupied was primarily that of an overseer and conciliator for Mafia members in Texas, and the family he oversaw was much looser in organization than what existed in the East. An informant noted how the standard tribute a Mafia boss would take is around 25% of net profit from criminal activities, but an FBI report a year later places Civello's take at just 2%. Still, the FBI had, in 1970 and before, identified 3 men who harbored ambitions to take Civello's place upon his demise. The first was soldier Johnny Ross Patrono. His father had been an early crime family member in the days of the Piranios, and Johnny was made himself sometime in the late 60s. Ties to the LA crime family and close associations with both Ianni and Civello had him labeled as the #1 man among the Italian gambling element in 1961, but a host of other evidence contradicts this. One particularly hostile informant in 1966 said Patrono is usually broke, would do anything for $1, and is a big fat slob, a dumb errand boy for Joe and Sam Campisi. A different informant shared a similar opinion. Patrono is an errand boy and a lackey who is too stupid, too fat, and too broke to be worth anything. Therefore, despite his ambition, based on the above, we can safely say Patrono could never have succeeded Civello as the boss of the Mafia in Dallas. Another man who expressed desire to take the top spot upon Civello's death was his underboss, Joe Ianni. Throughout Civello's reign, he remained his right-arm man and often was the most active, high-ranking Mafia member in the state when Civello retreated into the background. If we look back at the succession of bosses in the Dallas crime family, each had been underboss before his ascension to the top spot, and it's logical that Ianni would have followed this pattern. Indeed, certain intelligence officials speculated in 1970 that this was in fact the case. However, his bad heart may have caused him to pass on the position, and in any case, he died soon after in 1972. The final, most likely suspect who took over from Civello was Joe Campisi, owner of the Egyptian lounge restaurant. His father had been a soldier under the Piranios, and Joe himself was often included on suspected membership lists as early as '59. Indications from FBI reports show Civello did not have the highest opinion of Campisi. He believed he had a big mouth, a reputation of his shared by many in the underworld. Yet significantly, he was identified by at least one informant in 1970 as successor to Civello as boss of Dallas's LCN. The police department consistently stated their belief that he was no more than a well-connected local gambler, but he is known to have been very close with the Marcello brothers of New Orleans and had extensive ties in both the city government and the Dallas County government. Informant noted, Campisi is connected with both state judges and members of the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. Indeed, his influence with the county sheriff's office in 1972 was so acute, the FBI would not approach them for Campisi's fingerprints, being certain he would be tipped off. When the county sheriff Bill Decker died in 1970, Campisi was a strong supporter of his successor Clarence Jones, believing bookmakers would be able to operate in Dallas County under Jones with no problems. In the same year, he was also giving cash donations to Judge John Meade during his run for Congress, and Meade was suspected of knowing exactly where this money was coming from. The FBI, although initially wary of the intelligence from the Dallas Police Department, did largely wrap up investigation into the Mafia in Texas soon after. There are few records relating to Campisi or others after the early 1970s, and a 1978 Texas Organized Crime Report stated, currently, there exists 26 LCN families within the United States, though no family presently lives in Texas. Joe's son and 2 young nephews had already began bookmaking by 1970. Fast forward to 2019, and Joe's grandson David Campisi was arrested for running a large bookmaking operation since 2005. An associate admitted he operated as a bookie with at least 5 other people in an operation that brought in at least $2,000 per day. There is, of course, no evidence this is in any way related to a Dallas Mafia, and the crime family has almost certainly been extinct for decades, even if Joe Campisi did briefly take over its remnants in 1970. That is, unless you believe the threat delivered by Corky Campisi's mother when her home was being robbed in 2000. And let me tell you another thing. I'm in the Mafia, and we're gonna get you.